Agile for Humans, Episode 5.
Processes and tools dominate today's Agile discussions, but we are devoted to the individuals and interactions that make it work. From the beginner to the veteran practitioner, we have something for you. Welcome to Agile for Humans.
Hello, everyone. I'm your host, Ryan Ripley. Joining me this week, an international panel of Agilists spanning time zones, countries, and continents. Neil Killick is up late at night joining us from Australia. Hello, Neil.
Hello. How you doing?
Meanwhile, JB Rainsberger is starting his morning in Canada. Hey, JB.
How are you doing today?
I'm doing great. How are you, sir?
So far, so good.
And finally, Mr. George Dinwiddie's joining us again. He's rounding out the American contingent with me. How are you doing, George?
I'm doing great.
So today, guys, the topic is no estimates. And with this type of topic, one that can be not necessarily controversial, but certainly interesting, I'd like to start with a definition of terms to make sure that we're talking all on the same page, that we know at least the lay of the land and some of the boundaries, just to help the discussion stay on, I think, an even playing field. And Neil, being the no estimates advocate that you are, and certainly a prolific author on this topic, would you start us off with your view of no estimates and perhaps the way that you define it, just to get us started?
I guess it was a conversation that started with that hashtag on Twitter. It would be over 3 years ago now, actually. Yeah, back in 2012. And I believe it was started by Woody Zuel, although we're not quite sure. But we think that Woody was the first person to post on that hashtag. I think it's become, in terms of definition, I mean, I don't really think of it as something that has a definition as such. Like, for me, it's always just been a sort of a convenient vehicle for a conversation about the topic of estimation in software, and I guess, particularly from the angle of exploring situations where, we might actually sort of not have to use estimation, or whether it's actually the prevailing use of them are so damaging in our industry that actually perhaps there's it's worth discussing the sort of the other extreme of sort of not estimating as a starting point to flesh out more meaningful conversations about when it is appropriate to estimate and how we should actually estimate software projects. So yeah, like I say, I don't really sort of see it as no estimates is one thing or a method or anything like that. It's just kind of become lots of things to lots of different people, and that's really good from my point of view.
So JB and George, is that a fair starting point that we can all jump into?
Well, I'd say, let's go with that. I don't really have a definition for no estimates. To be honest, I think it's a rather unfortunate name, and I think the name leads to more heat than light. So let's go on and talk about what we mean, and I think we'll generate a lot more light than heat.
When no estimates first got its name on Twitter, I know that what I was talking about at the time was specifically the problems that I saw with teams trying to estimate small bits of work. And so I kind of do have a single working definition of no estimates. Not that that's the definition of what no estimates is. I mean, part of the problem is that as soon as you give it a name, then it's not just the concept, but it's people's perception of the concept and then the actions they take after based on their perceptions. That all becomes part of the thing. But I mean, when I jumped on no estimates as a hashtag on Twitter, I was talking specifically about, maybe don't bother estimating individual pieces of work that are less than about 3 months in size. That when you start figuring out the details of how we're going to deliver features and, small increments of a product, once we start talking about stuff that takes less than about 3 months to do, I feel like as the size of the piece of work goes down, so does the value in trying to figure out how long it's going to take to do. And so, yes, we probably do need to have a rough idea how much we think how many millions or how many hundreds of thousands of dollars we think we're going to spend on a project, or release is going to have this much stuff in it, or I think that the stuff that we want to do in this 3-month release is going to take 4.5 months as opposed to 4 months 1 week as opposed to 5 months 1 week. That's when I say chuck the estimates, just rank everything by how important it is and just do as much of it as you possibly can, as well as you can, as quickly as you can. And I'm with George that I think that on the one hand, no estimates is an unfortunate name because it has the word no right next to the word estimate. And I think a lot of people rightly criticize us for it. But what people, I think, don't remember is the few months before Woody posted something that said no estimates on Twitter, we were talking about this stuff in great detail and trying to get people involved in the conversation. And, like what happens when you throw a parade and nobody shows up? That's kind of what it was for us. And at that time, we thought, well, let's just throw a little controversy out there and see what happens. And it did get people involved in the conversation. It got maybe more people than we'd liked involved in the conversation that wasn't quite what we were hoping it was. But I think I'm okay with the heat that it has attracted because of the light that it's attracted. And as an experiment, I tweeted for several months afterwards with the hashtag #mehestimates or mestimates, as it should be pronounced. And people just, you know what? It's unfortunate but true that when you're trying to get a new group of people involved in a conversation, often you have to start with a ridiculously extreme articulation of your view in order to get them involved. I don't like it. I hope to get away from it as quickly as possible. But, extreme programming kind of did the same thing that No Estimates has done in terms of its marketing. And you could argue whether it was right and whether it was good, but in many ways it was effective. And I think that's kind of what we've done here. And I'm glad to see people like Neil really going in depth in a way that I don't have the energy to do behind this No Estimates hashtag, and people like Vasco and others. I'm quite happy to just sit on the sideline, with a nice glass of wine and watch the fireworks and try to step in every so often and remind people that we said no estimates to try to get people involved. And doesn't it kind of suck that we had to do that?
Certainly a fair point. And I think it's great that you guys acknowledge that part of the hashtag name has led to some heat. You own that. That's great. As far as your comment, JB, about when to apply estimates, so under a 3-month period, so should I assume that perhaps an area where estimates are appropriate could be at a portfolio level?
Well, certainly you need some rough idea how much you're going to spend. We're undergoing a house renovation here. We're kind of doing it in a little bit of a no estimates fashion, in the sense that we're trying to keep an eye on what needs to be done and try to make sure that we get stuff done as quickly as possible. But when we first started talking with the general contractor who's helping us with the renovation, we did need to make sure that what we want to get done, or at least what we thought we wanted to get done, was going to cost closer to a few tens of thousands of dollars as opposed to a few hundreds of thousands of dollars. We just needed to double check that before we get started. It's kind of like, it's kind of like doing a blunder check when you play chess. It's not necessarily that you're evaluating whether the move is perfect, but you at least want to make sure that the move doesn't hang a rook. And so that was the first thing we needed to do. So at the level of, can I even afford this at all? Is what I have in mind realistic given my budget at all? That's the level at which some estimating is, I'm assuming, inevitable. But when it comes down to, now that we sort of have a rough idea that we can spend about $25,000 on this renovation, and now we better get the most we can for that $25,000, and we better also be prepared for it to cost a little more than that. So let's find some money in the cushion somewhere. Whether the drywall costs $1,300 to put up or $1,100 to put up is really not that interesting to me. And that's kind of how I view the no estimates thing. Is I see teams get bogged down in arguments over whether drywall is going to cost $1,100 or $1,300 or $1,500, and I just, you know what? How about let's just get the drywall up as quickly as possible and do it well enough. And if there are surprises, then there are surprises. Welcome to software. Welcome to construction. Welcome to home renovation. If you're not expecting surprises, then maybe you should go into a much more predictable field of work. So that's a very, very long, ridiculous answer. The short version is I don't know how you could do product portfolio management without some kind of estimating. But that's estimating big things to within an order of magnitude, not estimating little things to within a factor of 2.
I've been kind of coming at this from a different angle. Way back in 2008, 2009, Bob Payne and I were working with some teams at a client. We happened to notice that they were spending a lot of time estimating stories, and their perceived velocity was seesawing up and down. They were often either taking on too much work for a 2-week sprint or not enough and having to pull in stuff. And they were, doing fairly well for a new team. But we decided that well, let's do a little investigation. And we looked at the data we had. In my opinion, that estimating small pieces of work like stories, the purpose of that is to decide how much work fits into the sprint. It's really not for long term, because that would force you to break everything long term down into stories and estimate this big pile of them, and that's going to change. So that's a lot of wasted effort. So we looked at this and we crunched some numbers. We got some data from Vasco also and crunched his numbers, and it agreed with ours that the predictive power of counting the stories was as good or a little better almost all the times. We found one team in Vasco's data where they did a little better with estimating than if you counted stories. But all the rest of it, the predictive power for how much fits into the sprint was better off counting stories, which is obviously a much quicker procedure. So we tried to get a session into Agile 2009, and it didn't get picked up. But we did try again a few years later and got a session in 2012 on this idea. And as we sat down to, once the session got accepted, then we had to actually design it. We just had an idea before then. So as we started working through the session, then I became more and more aware that, we couldn't just throw estimates out. There were a lot of times where there was a need for an estimate, but you didn't need to estimate down at that low level, that it wasn't necessarily helping. Where it did help was in getting people to have conversations. And there were other ways to force those conversations, such as coming up with acceptance scenarios that I find works better with the teams that I've worked with. So we were doing that, but I started looking at, what are the needs of estimations? And it varies tremendously. And I don't think you can say, well, in this situation or on this time scale, you need estimations, and on this one you don't. You really have to look at what are the needs, or the expressed needs even, for the people asking for estimates. Try to work back from those needs. Sometimes you need estimates not because they're super valuable, but because some person who is trying to make a decision needs some reassurance that they're on the right track. Like Joe was talking about with cost of renovation. And having built a house, I know exactly what that feeling is. And it's quite disconcerting when you talk to a builder and they can't give you an idea of how much what you describe is likely to cost. We rejected some builders because they couldn't tell us, give us any clue. They'd say, you can pay us to do a detailed design and then we can tell you. No. That's not what we wanted to do. We wanted to know, is this about a $200,000 house or about a $400,000 house? And I got the feeling that they were not experienced enough at the size and style house we were proposing to be able to know that. So we went with a different builder.
So it sounds like a lot of the value in estimation, George, at least from what you're talking through, is that shared understanding of the work and how that process can drive, from stakeholder to developer, a true understanding of what we're trying to do. Is that a fair statement?
No, I think that's just one of many things. So I've been trying to catalog some of the reasons for estimating. I've come up with quite a few. There's stuff. What if you've got 2 projects that you could do, but you're pretty sure you only have the cash to do one of them? They both seem about as valuable. Then you'd want to look at, which one's the cheaper to do? That's one thing. Typically, as I dig into this, you need estimates to help you make a decision. If you can formulate what that decision is, and then think about how, or even if estimates, will help make this decision, then what's the appropriate level of precision that I need for that estimate? And then you can make rational choices. Too often we say, we need an estimate, so we need to do it this way because this is the way we've always done it. And that may be too much precision, it may be too little precision.
And that's kind of the big if. I have to say that just like in the early days of XP, I like to think that if Twitter were around in 2000, we'd be having exactly the same discussion around the hashtag no documentation. And right, just like if Twitter had been around in 2005, we'd be having exactly the same conversation around no sprint. Somebody had the bright idea of saying, "Hey, let's not do documentation." Now, they said it that way, I think, to snap us to attention, force us to confront the idea that maybe we're wasting a lot of time writing a bunch of documentation that no one's going to read. Not that anyone's still doing that anymore, but was an epidemic problem 15, 20 years ago. And I think that's really what the no and no estimates is really meant to be exactly that, is meant to snap us to attention, to ask us, why are we estimating? And George's point of, we kind of generally agree that estimates, one of the purposes of estimates is to inform decisions. And that's why I say as loudly as I can and often, if you can't articulate the decisions that these estimates inform, then you're probably safe in not producing these estimates for a while. Just like if you don't know who the audience of this document is, then probably you can get away with not producing the document and seeing what happens. To me, that's one crucial aspect of what makes no estimates. What makes that a good hashtag and what makes it a good banner for us to use is that it does make you think about those kinds of things and push the boundaries of how much can we get away without estimates. That's that's one of the ways that we confront what do we really value estimates for. I mean, the biggest problem I have with estimates, not estimating, but estimates, is that when you ask people why they do it, they can't give you an answer that's not ultimately circular. They do it because they've been brainwashed to do it. And I know brainwash sounds like a drastic term, but I think it's apt. They're indoctrinated into needing estimates. I think of the old Flintstones cartoon when they bought the drive-in restaurant. One of the suppliers said, "Well, you need to buy 3 tons of parsley." What are we going to do with 3 tons of parsley? You put it on the plate so the customer can throw it away. That's a lot of where we are with estimates. We do estimates because somebody in a textbook told us that we have to produce them, and that's the thing that I want to stop. That's what I just want to stop, that mindlessness. I don't, and I'm happy to take the heat in exchange for stopping. If I can just stop one person mindlessly estimating today, then I've done my job.
It's interesting. So I guess that's more the angle that I'm interested in nowadays. I think when I first got interested in the no estimates hashtag, it was more around the value of estimating itself, like as an activity. But now I guess my angle is more around just like you mentioned, the sort of mindlessness of it, and actually how much I guess I call it the estimation culture kind of drives our software projects and actually dominates what we're doing and becomes the most important thing to think about rather than the value of what we're building. It's more the schedule that is produced from these estimates that then drives the decisions around, and the deadlines around what we're delivering. And this is sort of something I've seen a lot in organizations I've worked in, that you sort of do these estimates at the beginning and you come out with a sort of schedule out of that. And then that's then driving the delivery aspects of what we're doing and the decision making. And I strongly question that. I absolutely embrace the idea of estimating for the purposes of trying to make a good decision, financially, or if you actually do have a real deadline, if you've got some regulatory requirement or some kind of client commitment that's been made, absolutely, we need to factor that into what we're doing. But when we're just driving from a schedule or a plan with no real reason to do that, and actually, our driving outcomes should be around sort of the user experience, the customer outcome we're delivering. And yet we're kind of lambasting people for being late on delivering something, even though the outcome is supposed to be more about the value we're delivering for the customer. That's where I see more of the issue, and the sort of cultural impacts of that. I call it sort of the ethics of sort of estimation culture that is quite prevailing.
The thing is I don't see that as a problem with estimate. First of all, there's a problem with the level of precision of those estimates often.
Yep.
Get way too detailed and try to plan in too much detail. But that sort of estimation I find extremely valuable to say, okay, here's what we're planning right now. And that way, as we move along, we can get an idea of whether the assumptions we were making when we developed this plan are holding true. Mm-hmm. The problem comes in is that people make those plans look too slick and type them up nice and neatly, and they generate pretty pictures. and people start believing in them. So when reality and the plan diverge, then they think, oh, there's something wrong with reality.
Yeah.
And that doesn't work for me. What that tells me is when they diverge, okay, there's some assumption built into our plan that's not true, or probably lots of them, really. Why is our plan different? And this is something I find very valuable for estimation. It lets us create a hypothesis that then we can test. And when that hypothesis turns out to be false, we're not going to, the work is not proceeding at this rate. Therefore, we're not likely to hit this target date given our current trajectory. That lets us do something early rather than waiting until we get there and discover, here we are a week before the end of a year-long project and we're going to slip the date 6 months.
Absolutely. That's right. I think teams shoot themselves in the foot a lot with this, with the estimates they make, at the beginning. And they do provide this kind of precise date or this precise amount of scope. And then, of course, you're sort of setting yourself up for failure from day one because you're setting expectations around these things. And then, if a week later some catastrophe happens, then suddenly, like your plan has gone downhill. Last week you were saying everything's green and everything's on track. Now suddenly you're saying, oh, actually we're way off track. How could the sort of senior stakeholders saying, well, how could that have happened in 1 week? How could things have gone so south?
It has to happen someday. I mean, it happened on Thursday. It's not going to take 2 months for us. It's not like we're working in slow motion, right? On Thursday, something happened. That's how it happened in the week.
Or there's something you've been ignoring for a long time, and it's just the end of an illusion.
Yeah, right. Sure. If you build that uncertainty in from the beginning, then you've actually got some wiggle room. Like if something does go wrong, you can say, well, that's still within the boundaries of where we thought, because there's so much uncertainty at the beginning, and it's particularly the case when you've got sort of unstable teams and a sort of highly volatile environment. It's even more the case and more important that we sort of build that uncertainty in at the beginning. And and I see all the time. I see like burn-up charts, like teams delivering burn-up charts with the line just coming beautifully off the end of their trend and right up to where the delivery date is supposed to be. I'm kind of going like, well, A, why are they putting a single line in the first place, and B, why is that line going off at a really optimistic angle rather than the actual trend of the burn-up chart? So. I just think we're not building the appropriate level of uncertainty into our plans. But I agree with George. I mean, in a healthy environment, the act of estimating and using estimates for decisions is actually it's a really healthy and useful thing to do. The problem I find though is that I just don't see those healthy cultures where that happens too often, and that's really where I'm interested in this whole area. So it's not about saying estimates are bad, absolutely not. It's more about how do we create that conversation so that the people asking for them are made aware that if someone gives them back a single date or a single scope point or a number of story points, they're actually coming back and saying, this isn't really an estimate, right? You're actually sort of committing something you can't commit to.
I've just created a burn-up for a large government program that I'm coaching, and the data is really sketchy. It's really hard to tell. There's constant changing the number of teams, the makeup of the teams. The stuff in the future is really unknown in size. So created this burn-up that shows a lot of the uncertainty. So it's being done as a bunch of smaller projects, of course, and some of which are parallel, which makes it harder to do. And you trace this out, and we came out to the end of 2020. And this is a very rough guess. It's a messy burn-up. There's stuff that I don't really know how to show very well. And there are people who want to convert it into a PowerPoint so that it can be passed around the executives easily. And I keep saying, no, don't do that. Then they'll believe it's true. But we also took a piece of yarn and put it out to the date that people keep talking about, which is in 2018 for this huge program. And the great thing about a burn-up is then you can show more than one projection. And people can ask, well, why is the difference? What makes us think we're going to get up to that rate when right now we're doing this other rate? Which is still better than than the rate at the last couple of years. But there's a lot of complications. There's work started that then got abandoned for business reasons. Lots of turmoil in various things. So this chart tells a story and lets you reason about the future. And it asks questions about the future. So a messy burnup chart can be really useful for that, to try to show what you know and then tentatively show what you think.
Yeah.
But I would imagine you could draw that exact same burnup chart without ever having estimated any of those items. That you could instead say, because a burnup chart is, I assume you're using the term to mean by definition, visual representation of the rate at which we've completed work.
But without estimating the items, we have no idea what that rate is.
But go back to what you said not a moment ago, but earlier, or we've been talking about the idea that using the number of items completed as a measure of progress, as opposed to what we thought the cost was going to be before we did it, gave roughly the same results. So that same burnup chart with here's the number of items we completed, and then trusting that the number of that the relative sizes of the items will somewhat converge over time.
Well, we would have to break the items up much smaller then.
Pardon?
Because we would have to break the items up much smaller then.
Oh, if these are bigger size items, then yes, I can understand.
So this whole thing is about 15 items.
Oh, okay.
So that's not enough resolution to do that.
No.
So then we need to, and some of these have already been split. There are some that say, okay, it's this part of this product line, and then there's another item that's typically considered smaller, but it's the deferred rest of this product line.
Okay, so this gets more to the level of detail of the kinds of where I have no issue at all with producing estimates, although to me those estimates tend to look a lot more like budgets than estimates. A long time ago, I don't remember where I first read it, but I wrote about it not long after, the idea of treat estimates as budgets. That really, when we're talking about bigger pieces of work, something on the order of, say, a team needing 3 months to a year. When we're talking at that level or bigger, usually what we have in mind isn't how much we think it's going to cost, but more how much we can afford to spend. That's certainly the way I think about it. Going back to the whole renovation thing, right? That's another example of it. It's not that I necessarily think that this is a $25,000 renovation, a renovation here for $25,000 or less. And I'm prepared to go to 35 if that's what it takes. And I really hope it doesn't end up being 70. But I know that I can be okay with 25. And so I try to find a renovation program that's roughly going to fit into $25,000.
So that suits your needs in your situation. This situation's a little different than that, in that. So first of all, this is a federal government agency, so there's no profit loss motive. Instead, they have a mission they need to meet, and that mission is the important thing. And this program is computerizing huge amounts of business processing that's currently done on paper. So it's an enormous effort. It's a very hard thing to simplify the workflows and regularize them, because they've grown into the workflows they are for reasons. Many of those reasons are lost in time and nobody could articulate, but you can't just all of a sudden change those without having huge effects on the globe. So it's a different sort of situation. So here we really are trying to estimate size in terms of effort to implement. And we were doing that with relative estimate. Well, given what we know about, this future chunk, is that about the same size as something that we've done so far?
And this sounds this sounds an awful lot like one of the other areas where, again, I think people mindlessly apply estimates. I'm not saying you are, but people generally mindlessly apply estimates. I'm not sure it helps. And that is when you're in a situation where we know we have to do this work, we've committed to do this work, and we simply have to get through it as quickly as we can. One of the areas where I really insist that teams abandon any kind of estimates is in a situation where someone has made a commitment. They have to do this chunk of work. They already have a deadline that they know they're not going to meet. Everybody in the room knows it. Even the person who committed knows that we're not going to get there. And we simply have to get through it as fast as we can and hope for the best. This is actually a perfect situation where I'm not really sure what value the estimates add. When the ship is sinking, I'm not sure it helps that much to know at exactly what time the ship will end up entirely underwater. I think at that point, you get as many people off the ship as you can.
What ship is sinking? Yeah.
Oh no! If
maybe
it's a piece of work that someone has committed us to, and somehow there's an expectation that we're going to be able to complete the work by, I don't know, 2 years or something, and everybody knows we can't possibly do all that stuff in 2 years. We might be able to do it in 3. It might take 5. Miracles could happen. Who knows? That's the point at which I'm not sure it helps us that much to know exactly how bad the situation is.
Oh, I think it
but rather
does.
to say, let's get
So yeah, JB, let me ask you this.
Mm-hmm.
So let's say an executive makes that decision. I think George, we might be going down the same track here. Doesn't the estimate help bring to light the bad management practice?
We can get that. So I would say yes, but can we not? Certainly, there are better tools than estimates to bring that to light.
Well, so wait a minute. So deadlines can be changed.
Right.
Deadlines don't get changed unless people feel like they need to change them.
Right.
If you don't have some way of projecting into the future and saying, given the way things are going now, this is what's going to happen as best as we can tell.
Mm-hmm.
And and it leaves this deadline, this artificial deadline in the dust. This is exactly the sort of thing that helps an executive change that deadline and say, oh, I didn't realize that. I didn't realize that this house renovation is, in the hundreds of thousands of dollars rather than the tens of thousands of dollars. This is the thing that they need in order to question the assumptions they had made when they came up with that deadline, and make a change. It also is a great, way of saying, oh, well, we may be able to find, is there a different path we could take? Maybe it's the way we're doing this. Maybe that's making this take so long. Maybe we can find an easier way to do it. But you're not going to have those conversations until you see, the current path we're taking is not making people happy. So,
right, but we don't need to know we don't need to know that it's going to take 4.7 years as opposed to 5.2 years to make that.
Sure.
So that's a level. That's a level of precision that I think we've all hammered. The level of precision in that instance is probably not important, but the ability to say, "Look, you've committed us to a 2-year program. We know it's more than 2." There is some estimation effort that has to go into that to be able to bring that information back to the executive. Correct?
Yes, we're getting back to exactly the same kind of argument that I do on Twitter that tells me that people are taking the no and no estimates way too literally.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm not saying we shouldn't do it. I'm saying the level of precision is interesting. But I'm wondering if we can frame a situation, JB, that no estimates would make sense. And I think in my past experience, so I've worked in medical device where the federal government can tend to play a little heavily and it can be a little heavy-handed. Sometimes they will come in with a regulatory requirement and a date that is not flexible. This particular date and deadline is immutable.
Mm-hmm.
And so at that point, I think that's a situation where you break down the work as small as possible, work in small batches, get the value out the door as fast as you can, and not worry about the estimates. Because if this date hits and you miss, you're getting fined.
Exactly. This goes back to the bookmark that I wanted to put in the concept of late. I'd like us to get away from being late as a measure of how we did relative to our initial plan, and I'd rather us talk about late as a real business result. I mean, to me, the project is late if it's going to deliver something too late to meet our needs, too late to deliver enough profit, too late to meet the regulatory requirements, too late to keep us from shutting the doors for good. I don't care how that relates to our initial thought of how long it was going to take. And yet we still have the notion of late that still seems to dominate, as particularly enterprise level software development practice, is this notion of comparing actuals to our guesses. And I find this tiresome in the least and negligence and malpractice at the worst. That let's think about late compared to actual result.
But what drives that behavior? And it strikes me that in most cases what drives that is that there's this chain of people. Somebody is trying to make a decision, and they've passed the word along down this reporting chain, And the people in the middle haven't checked to see what's the decision to be made, what's the point of this. And so it's like the game of telephone,
Yes.
broken telephone, and the message gets changed. It's easy to make it precise. It's easy to say, oh, well, we need this precision and rigor. And if we convert everything to numbers, then we can tell. But they lose the meaning at the same time because the actual data doesn't have that precision.
That goes back
that's
Sorry.
what I'm really working at with this particular burn up. Everybody I talk to wants to make it more precise. And I keep saying no.
And this is where I think this is where the circularity of the reasoning comes in, is that, as you say, there might be somebody somewhere near the top of the organization chart, somewhere near the beginning of this chain of events, that genuinely has a decision that they need data to help them make. But somewhere along the line, somebody, a well-meaning person perhaps, has it in their mind because of some thing they read in a book, or because of something some professor told them,
or the way they did it somewhere else,
or 20 years ago, whatever, that says estimates are the way to get this. And from that point forward, it then becomes estimates for their own sake rather than the desire to gather information in order to influence a decision.
And that's why I keep trying to take it back to the needs.
Right.
So Bob Marshall's antimatter principle, I think, is a fabulous thing to think about here. And we should attend to people's needs. And being aware of all the varying needs of all the varying people is really tough, but that's where we find clarity. And attending to needs doesn't necessarily mean we can meet those needs.
Right.
But we need to attend to them. So this guy in the middle, he has a need for coming up with some answer he can pass up that seems safe for his position in the organization. Right. So, and this can lead us astray in the overall goal of the person who asked for some information.
I'd like to. There was something interesting I thought you mentioned earlier, George, where you mentioned that the estimation helps you see if the sort of delivery is off track, and then you can start making decisions about, well, how do we, perhaps there's a way that we can make this simpler and deliver it more quickly. And I guess it's an interesting point, because why wouldn't we be doing that all the time anyway? Like, why would we not be actually always looking for the simplest chunks of and slices of value, like all the way through as we iterate? And I kind of, it actually sort of reminds me of some situations I've been in where, we've kind of estimated a project up front, and let's say it's 6 months, and then we've kind of gone away, and everyone, then it's almost like people are like, oh, we've got 6 months now, so we don't really need to worry too much about what we do in the first few weeks, and it's all gonna, we're going to deliver it all anyway. It will all pan out, and and I was kind of like, well, shouldn't we be trying to find that first slice of value, and then sort of iterate over that, rather than just kind of let it all pan out, and then one day we go, oh, you know what, we're running late. We're going to be later than that 6 month estimate we said. Now let's try and manage our scope and figure out a way. We should be doing that all the way along anyway.
As we know, the best thing that we could possibly do when we actually, in that rare instance, when we have some slack, of course, the first thing we should do is squander it.
Yeah.
So yeah, in this large program that I'm working with, and those small slices tend to be 6 months to 2 years in size. Yeah. But still, I think that at some point we've got to, instead of trying to figure out, the best way, we've got to make progress. And certainly there's been a lot of that. When I look at the code, I suspect that there are other design principles that could have been brought in that could have made this whole system a lot simpler. I can't say that, there's a lot of people who have worked on this very hard. And so for me to come in as a latecomer and say, oh, you did this wrong, that's not going to fly.
No.
And it may not be wrong, because this has to support a huge number of people.
Yeah.
Perhaps, the things that I think about would not do that. Thousands of man hours that have gone into the design as it is.
Absolutely. So I guess I'm not talking about your specific example, but I guess I see a lot of, for me, like this sort of two distinct ways that Agile can be used, quite effectively to sort of deliver on outcomes. One is that sort of that we we take a kind of normal project and sort of kick it off in the way that we normally would, and we sort of estimate the scope and we estimate the size of it. And then we start using Agile as and the empirical framework within Agile to sort of manage our risk and sort of make sure that we're on track and sort of manage our scope along the way. And I kind of, but for me, that's not really harnessing the full. And George, I'm not talking about your situation here. I'm talking, broadly about other sort of kind of situations.
Oh, I understand what you mean. Yeah.
Yeah, sure. So and then there's for me what the sort of heart of the Agile approach, which is actually, let's not just try and estimate figure out the whole thing, estimate it, and then track our way towards it. Let's actually try and solve the problem as quickly as possible and deliver value as quickly as possible, and then iterate over that, over what we've done, and actually be prepared to throw away what we've done and constantly be sort of solving the problem more and more that's going to meet the needs of what we're delivering for the customer. And
sure.
and I feel like we tend to, as an industry, we're still doing traditional projects and managing them with an Agile approach, which is an improvement, but it's still a little bit mediocre for me. It's still not harnessing the true spirit of Agile, which is we have a constraint, like a budgetary constraint or a time constraint. Let's deliver the best possible product in that time frame.
Right.
And if that time frame happens to be quite a substantial time frame, let's break that down into very small time frames and keep on delivering an outcome within those. And that's going to sort of harness a really powerful approach of letting emergence and ending up with something that's surprising and that's way better than you ever could have dreamed of. I feel like sometimes we lose sight of that in the industry, and we just use Agile to sort of manage projects a bit better.
So Neil, can I ask you a question around that?
Yeah.
Is there a barrier to entry for that kind of hyper productivity, though? I mean, do you find that there are things that you have to put in place in order to get to that level of agility?
You have to think it's possible first.
Yeah,
right.
Look, I wouldn't call it a barrier to entry because I think it's more of a mindset, really. It's
exactly.
Of course, there are always going to be constraints, like technical constraints and cultural constraints. If you've got a group of people who are trying to, who have a focus on customer value and on, trying to save the company as much money as possible, deliver quickly to the customer and also cheaply as possible, but with the right outcome. You bring those people together and you start working with those constraints and bringing out the creativity of the great people that you've hired and coaching them along the way if they're not quite there yet. For me, it's like, rather than sort of just accepting the situation I'm in, I'll try and, I guess, kind of influence it towards a way of saying, well, we might have 2 years to deliver this thing, but let's try and solve the problem in 1 month. Let's start thinking creatively about what would we do if we only had a month to do this project. And sometimes you come up with things like crazy ideas that you never would have dreamed of if you just left it as a 2-year exercise that you kind of increment through.
So I think the barrier of entry is often on the customer side.
Sure.
Particularly when you've got internal customers in the organization, because they say, oh, well, we can't use this until we have this whole thing.
Yeah.
And when you've got thousands of those customers, that's a really hard thing to get through. That's a lot of coaching.
Yeah,
but
absolutely.
I think
so.
If there is a barrier to entry, I think it's preconceptions and limiting beliefs in the minds of a lot of people involved. Customers are just one group, project managers are another group, programmers are another group. To me, it seems like it's based in a kind of indoctrination. It's either this is what we did that seemed to work before, without really understanding whether what we did worked or we happened to do it and succeed anyway, or stuff that was written down in a textbook because it made sense in 1987 and doesn't make as much sense now, or made sense in the context that the author happened to find herself in, but doesn't make sense in all contexts. Or even just in, people's garden variety fear about what they're trying to do. As George pointed out, or articulated, what's safe for me in this situation, as opposed to what will work or what would be effective. When those things are at odds, then we're in real trouble. And that's, I think, part. Estimates at their worst, and I think on average, present another example of illusion of control. For me, that's why I love the no and no estimates, is I actually kind of want to shatter that illusion of control. What I'd rather do is create a space where people are willing to volunteer to have their illusion of control lovingly shattered, but I haven't figured out how to do that. And so hashtag no estimate seems to be the best I can do for that, the best approximation I have for that problem right now.
So I wonder if the manifesto actually took care of that for us, though, JB. And what I mean by that is, if the true measure of progress is working software, then why are we worried about an estimate? Why are we measuring off of that?
I'm with you, man. Like I said, it seems like in every situation where somebody tells me why they need estimates, I can think of a better tool.
And I was going to say, I was just going to say that, Ryan. So, to your question about barriers to entry, I guess the barrier to entry for working in an agile manner is that you're delivering done working software on a regular basis. Because if you're not, if the software is not actually done, then you can't really use these burn-up charts and measure your progress, because at some point you're going to get hit with bugs and tech debt, and so you can't use this mechanism. So if you could argue that's a barrier to entry, but like I say, I prefer to look at it as an opportunity to sort of figure stuff out with teams and how we can get better at doing that, rather than, hey, we can't actually work that way.
I tend to think of estimating, particularly estimating small units of work at the kind of precision that that we've been talking about as a bad idea. I like Ron Jeffries' way of articulating things as advanced practice. I'm kind of at the point now he says that rather tongue-in-cheek. That's his way of saying don't do it without sounding prescriptive. But that kind of estimating, and not estimating, those kinds of estimates, producing those kinds of estimates, sounds to me like an advanced practice. It's the kind of thing that we do after we're really good at other stuff. And then we can use that information to optimize our process. That's when we hit, for want of a better term, CMM level 5. I just don't see that stuff as being if we're very good at delivering close to our guesses, we deserve a vacation. And if we're very bad at it, then knowing how bad we are at it probably doesn't help as much as we think. Not as much as simply figuring out what is making us bad at it and trying to come up with ways to figure out how to get better at those things. That to me is really kind of the key to all this. For every problem people think estimates solve, I can think of a better tool. I can think of a tool that can get better results, that can attend to their needs better. And having that argument in the clinical friendly sense of argument, but having that debate, let's say, is where all the value from no estimates comes from. It's the creating a place where people, once they get past their initial revulsion, once people get past the idea that me typing hashtag no estimates means I don't care about my client's money, or I'm incompetent at some important aspect of software development, once we get past all that, then it's okay. Well, okay, tough guy, you think that you have better tools for managing risk than estimates? Tell me what they are and let's discuss them. I want to get there. I invite everyone listening to this, the next time that they see someone tweeting with a no estimates hashtag, to really think of it in those terms. That when I do that, I'm inviting you to ask the question, is there a better way that I can give you what you're looking for that you think estimates is going to give you?
And I think the discussion as it shifted into meeting needs, and particularly when Neil was discussing trying to get the work done faster in a simpler way, I think it actually does highlight a respect for the stakeholders' money that perhaps has not been highlighted or articulated in some of the past discussions that I've seen. So I think that's an important point. Neil, I'd want to ask, as you bring this mindset to clients, what kind of traction are you finding with stakeholders, with people who have value at risk, who are funding these projects? What kind of traction is there for this kind of thinking, for this kind of focus on perhaps more outcomes over estimates? And what are your experiences bringing stakeholders and people paying the bill on board with this way of looking at estimation?
Look, it's very tough, but to be quite honest with you, I think people have a perception of me that I kind of walk in on the Monday morning and sort of walk into people's offices and say, right, how are we gonna move forward without estimating, and going around telling all the teams to stop estimating. Like it's actually like I guess all the way along, I've been quite explicit in saying that I would never recommend to a team to stop estimating. Just just to blindly stop estimating, because it's actually disrespectful to the context that the team's in, and there could be very, very good reasons why they're estimating, as George pointed out. So what I try and focus on is just becoming more effective at software development and product development. And so what I try and do is focus on customer value, a focus on getting results quicker and cheaper for the business, a focus on reducing variation by working in small constraints or small iterations, creating more stability by persuading people that having stable teams is going to work better for them. It's going to create a more predictable environment. Teams staying together and work being fed to teams rather than teams being formed around work. Because straight away you're starting again from scratch in a situation where you can't possibly use velocity to predict anything. You're looking at least sort of a couple of months before you're going to get any kind of stability there. So it's really about working around the fringes and trying to create a more stable environment that can actually let creativity and agility thrive. So getting that predictability from that stability rather than from people making predictions. And I think that's where and I can completely understand why execs ask for these estimates, because they're trying to get this this certainty of when things are going to happen, and people keep giving them these precise dates and keep getting them wrong. So it's like, well, what's going on here? Why does everyone suck at estimation so bad? Like, why can't we be better at this? And as JB pointed out, again, it's that kind of control thing where, execs do tend to like semblance of control over what's happening. So I completely understand why they want the information. What I try and help teams with is to get better at all that stuff I mentioned, but also in an environment where they have to provide estimates, to make sure that they're building uncertainty in at the appropriate level to their estimations. So if they're doing an upfront estimate and they're coming together as a new team, then there's a whole bunch of uncertainty, and we need to factor that in. If they're quite a stable team and they've got quite a stable velocity, then they can be a little bit more, narrow with their banding of uncertainty. But still, let's start using language like, we are fairly confident that this will happen between these dates, rather than we will deliver this on this date. And so I try and actually that is very beneficial for the stakeholders, because they actually start getting that predictability through the accuracy rather than the precision, because now they can actually start to get fewer surprises, which is actually what they're looking for.
I'd like to highlight one aspect of what you're saying, Neil, and it's a little bit of a tangent from the estimation topic. A lot of this predictability and repeatability comes from focusing on the details of how well we're doing the little things. So it's like so many of the things that we really value, that we really want, we cannot approach them directly. We can't say, oh, we want this big program to be done sooner, and approach that directly. We have no way of really doing that. But if we approach it obliquely, by saying we'll have less waste if we do this in smaller pieces, and we can see it growing, and we separate, some of the important things from some of the baggage that tends to come along with it, when we do bigger chunks. If we focus on, let's see how much duplication we can eliminate on the code. Oh, isn't that interesting? Now we're developing code faster because we've removed a lot of duplication, and we've gotten good at removing duplication as we go. These oblique approaches pay such a huge dividend. Sometimes we focus too much on the one big thing, and we ignore too many of these. That was in what you were saying, but I wanted to emphasize it.
Yeah, sure. And look, nowadays I'm actually operating in the management space, so I see it as definitely my job is to work on the environment and sort of creating an environment where teams can thrive and create great software. So I'm always looking for these kind of opportunities to sort of bridge that gap between the stakeholders' needs and the team's needs, and to try and figure out a way of getting to a better place with that. And that's what I focus on.
By taking these excellent software engineering practices, and JB has an excellent lightning talk, 7 minutes and 26 seconds on test-driven development and how it makes consistency in Scrum work, which I'll put a link in the show notes because I think it's excellent and certainly applies here. But I'm wondering if we get good at creating environments, like Neil is saying, so we have teams that aren't broken apart every 6 months. We have a consistent team. We work in small batches. We do test-driven development. We have an engaged stakeholder who is weekly demos and constantly working with the team. We have all these great practices. We deliver software, valuable software, frequently. Does this build enough trust to where the pressure's taking off of estimates? And what I'm getting at is, if we engineer the environment and the practices correctly, do estimates just fall to the background?
If I may, I'd like to say the opposite. When a frustrated executive or senior manager asks, why aren't we better at hitting our plans? We often cite the exact opposites of all those things, right? We cite, we're too far away from the customer. You keep shuffling us around too often. Our technical environments are too unstable. We're having to work with this legacy code. Nobody knows how it works, and every time we touch it, we get 5 nasty surprises. We cite all these as reasons why we can't accurately guess how long it'll take to do things. And yet the answer that I get more often than not is, well, you have to live with those things because we don't know how to solve those problems. And I respect that. I agree. If I knew how to solve those problems, they'd be solved, right? I would have figured out a way to get the right people to listen to me. I don't know how to solve those problems either. But when we cite those as reasons why why we don't hit our estimates, and yet we still feel that extreme pressure. Well, why can't you people be better estimates? Well, I told you why we can't be better at estimates. These are all the reasons we can't be better at estimates. We all agree that we don't know how to solve those problems yet, and so that's why we're not going to be better at estimates. This is the kind of pointless cycle that makes me want to say, everyone stop. We've told you why this isn't working. We agree that we don't know how to solve those problems. I wish I had a magic formula that would make us be good at estimates in spite of those things, but I don't. I don't, you don't, George doesn't, Neil doesn't. So can we all just agree that we don't know? And you've got 2 options. You can either bang your head against the wall or you can try something else. That for me, that's what the no estimates hashtag, again, one key aspect of it is those of us who like it are the ones who say, let's try doing something else instead of banging our head against the wall.
Yeah, and I think that feeling that we have to hit estimates is the problem.
Right. That's just inattention to results, man. That's all that is.
Exactly. So basically, the truth of the matter is, it happens an awful lot, certainly in my experience. But basically, as soon as you've published that estimate or that plan, you've now committed to that. You've now made a commitment to the business that you're going to deliver within that estimation. And again, to George's point, that is not the fault of estimates at all. But there is something seriously wrong that this is happening.
Yeah, taking estimates out of the equation doesn't necessarily indict or convict estimates as the culprit, but it does indicate that estimates are an essential part of the problem. It's our interaction with those estimates that's the essential part of the problem. If we could just take that away and replace it with something that gives us some of the similar benefits without those particular drawbacks, why wouldn't we just do that?
Yeah. I don't think that does that. So I don't think the problem is our interaction with the estimates. I think it's our interaction between people.
Oh, that's what I mean.
And the estimates are a complete red herring there.
Yeah.
And that distrust.
You're right. They're a symptom, not a cause. I'm with you on that.
That distrust between people who are not communicating well enough is going to exist anyway. And tossing out estimates or doing them better is not going to fix that.
Well, I think tossing out estimates has a chance to help the situation along in that it reduces some of the friction. But I agree that getting better at the estimates is probably not going to build the trust.
I don't think even.
I guess the question I originally was trying to pose, and I think I did it poorly, was if we're delivering valuable software regularly, right? So we're getting an increment of software every 2 weeks. It's of high quality. It's valuable. The stakeholder is delighted. They're using it. Does that take the pressure off of the estimates? And what I mean by that is, does that remove the bad management practices that can sometimes cloud or cause estimates to be damaging?
Well, I would say, maybe not. I mean, there's a saying in sports that, when you're winning, then all of a sudden all the little things that annoy people don't annoy people anymore. So in a way, if we are actually hitting the results that we expect, I think kind of strangely enough, the opposite happens. Yes, it takes the pressure off the estimates in that the estimates don't surface the same kinds of problems that they did before. They don't represent the underlying problem. They don't push them in our face anymore. But also, then we kind of have some slack and we don't actually mind doing them. I would love to reach a point where our business, where we're hitting the results that we want so well that we can start then seeing the value in using low-level estimates as a way to optimize our delivery machine. That to me is when they really start to become valuable. We can get along without them, but then they become a useful optimizing tool. Most of the cases where I see, especially low-level estimates being overused, they're nowhere near that situation.
But yeah, I've been in situations where, at the beginning when we start working with the client, they want to know sort of how much they think we're going to do in each sprint. As we sort of build that trust for them by delivering something to them early and then delivering it often, the conversations then sort of just are all around, the software that we built and how we're going to take it forward, rather than estimating how much we're going to do next. So I've seen that the need dissipates as you build that trust and relationship with the customer and collaborate with them.
I'm very sorry, George, real quick. Tenor of the conversation starts to change from when am I going to get that to how can I get that sooner? Right. That to me makes a huge difference. And we haven't actually explicitly talked about the difference between estimating and estimate. And I worry that some people in the audience are going to confuse those two things. I don't mind estimating because it leads to discussions we need to have for other purposes. And I don't even necessarily mind that those estimating sessions result in numbers. I think that we can throw those numbers away once we've done the estimating, that the estimating leads us to have the discussions like, what do we really need to build? How can we build it sooner? How can we improve the way we're doing things? What is the most urgent thing that we need to do next? What is the thing that is not urgent yet, but we need to think about before it becomes urgent? All those kinds of discussions. Estimating, the act of estimating, often moves us in the direction of having those conversations. I think over time, if we drop the estimates first, if we just ignore the numbers that came out at the end, then slowly but surely we're realizing that what we're doing is not estimating anymore, but it's managing risk. And it just so happens that the activities between what we thought of as estimating and what we now think of as exploring and managing risk happens to overlap. And once we take away producing 2, 3, 5, 7, 1, 4, 6 at the end of those tasks, at the end of that activity, then we just stop thinking of it as estimating, and it becomes exploring the product. It becomes managing and identifying risks and all those things that we think estimating does for us that the estimates themselves don't really help us with.
So I think that's a very development-centric view, and I think that the business needs for estimating don't change. But I do think that if the development team is reliably generating demonstrable increments of progress, the business can do the rest of the estimation by themselves.
Right.
You've simplified the problem enough that they can project easily into the future and answer the questions that they need to answer and play with the what ifs that they need to play with.
And they can do it in units of measurement that matter to them.
That's true.
Not in weeks of effort, but in currency units and payback period and return on investment and cash on cash, that kind of stuff.
But there's always stuff. It's not so cut and dried and simple. And I've never found where the need goes away. I've worked with a lot of clients, and so therefore I go back to. It's not a question of whether we should throw out estimates or whether we should get better at them. It's really a question of digging down and understanding what the needs are, exploring those needs. And that's a hard thing to do. It takes you very much into the people realm and away from the technical realm. And that's scary for most people who have chosen software development as their field. But that's really where the progress is. That's really where the need is, where we need to understand what those needs are. Some of them are just, human need for reassurance. Some of them are business needs. They get all mixed up together. The people whose needs we're trying to understand probably can't articulate them either. And so it's an exploratory process on that end that is at least as hard as exploring what product sells to a customer.
And I think with that, George, I think you've left us in a great spot. I know that Neil, you're probably anxiously waiting to hit the sack for the night.
I've enjoyed it immensely, so was happy to go long into the night.
We certainly appreciate you slogging into the night and helping us out with this, what I think turned out to be an excellent conversation around no estimates. I think people will want to get a hold of you and discuss this more, and I'm sure we'll all see each other on the No Estimates hashtag soon. But let's start with JB. JB, how can people get a hold of you?
Absolutely. So first, if you'd like to read more of my brain droppings, then you've got jbrains.ca. That's jbrains.ca. Those are my initials. I didn't make it up. If you prefer to consume them in smaller forms, then @jbrains on Twitter. If you want to tell me I'm completely out to lunch, or if you want to ask me a question, then you can go to ask.jbrains.ca and let me know what you're thinking. I don't hang out on the No Estimates hashtag much anymore, so you'll occasionally see me on Meh Estimates, or actually my current favorite now is Clark Ching's hashtag Lestimating, which I'm jealous of him for thinking of that before I did.
All right, George.
Okay, on Twitter you can find me at @GDinwiddie. It's GDINWIDDIE. My company site, which doesn't get a whole lot of attention, is diacomputing.com. You can find a whole lot about what I've written on the subject of estimation at blog.gdinwiddie.com, and then click on the cloud tag estimation, and you'll find lots of words there.
That is true, and George, a lot of great content out there that I was going through the last couple of days to get ready for this. So definitely recommend both George and JB's blog, and along with Neil's here, who's I'm sure he's going to give us the address here in just a second.
Yes, so my blog's at neilkillick.com. I don't really have much to plug. I'm not a consultant nowadays, so I earn an honest living with a company. Absolutely come to my blog. I write about Agile topics in general, and there's a No Estimates category on there. I'm pretty active on Twitter, Neil_Killick. They're probably the best ways of getting hold of me.
All right, and if you like what you're hearing, have topics you'd like for us to cover, or have a suggestion to improve the show, please hit me up on Twitter @Ryan Ripley or email ryan@ryanripley.com. iTunes reviews helps keep the podcast going and helps grow the audience. 5 is our favorite number, and that many stars helps spread the word, so please leave your comments and reviews on iTunes.